Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm the Badger Reborn, and today I'm going to talk about whether the Amazon Wheel of Time TV show should be a weekly release or a binge-style season dump. This episode will be spoiler-free, so you can watch it no matter how much of the Wheel of Time you've read, even if you haven't even started. But if you haven't started, you should definitely do that. Before I start on that, I want to give a shout out to the Wheel of Time Trivia Challenge. This is a trivia group that operates on the Discord platform. They have trivia games multiple times a week and do both Wheel of Time games and general pub-style trivia with a variety of categories. It's challenging trivia, and the best part is you can play with a collaborative team with either people you get together beforehand or with a group of fellow players that will be organized when you join the game. I've been on a team that won, a team that got last by a mile, and a few teams in the middle. They've also recently added a 20 questions Wheel of Time game inspired by what I was doing on my Discord channel. It's a lot of fun too. I'll put a link to their Discord in the video description, so check that out. I'm also going to add a quick note about the events that have been going on in the past week. Thought about not saying anything because I like fantasy and the Wheel of Time to be kind of my escape from the real world, but you can't always escape from the real world, and sometimes things are more important. Racism is a real thing and a perpetual problem in America and other countries as well. Whether on the individual level or systemic, and both exist, it should be discovered and rooted out and gotten rid of. White privilege also exists and is something that it's great to acknowledge. That doesn't mean that it's bad to be a white person. I am one myself, if you haven't noticed. And it doesn't mean that your life, if you're a white person, hasn't been hard. It just means that race isn't one of the things that's contributed to making it harder. I know a lot of you have been putting a lot of time and thought into it this week, but if you haven't, I encourage you to do that. Just spend some time looking up some reliable resources, reading some things, and just kind of think about whether you're playing a part or whether you can at least kind of learn and help some people. It's actually something that we've experienced in the Wheel of Time community recently with the show coming out. Some people of color felt marginalized or unwanted due to some of the backlash over the skin color of the actors who were cast to play characters. That's just something to think about. I know those thoughts weren't super eloquent and certainly won't solve all the problems, but I wanted to say something because I feel it was important. That's as deep as I'll get into it for now, so I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. By the way, if you noticed, I am wearing the same shirt, but it's not the same day, so if you caught that, nice job. If you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that my preference is for a weekly release, but I think there are arguments both ways. I'll start by presenting the case for a season dump, aka releasing it all at once. Let's first look at some of the most successful fantasy shows that have been released in a dump format. The best examples of these are The Witcher, Stranger Things, Umbrella Academy, and Lock and Key. All of these shows were on Netflix, which has really perfected the market for releasing a show all at once. Since they aren't a TV channel, Netflix doesn't need to worry as much about weekly viewership, and that principle could be the same for Amazon Prime, which is what The Wheel of Time will be released on. Netflix announced that The Witcher was viewed by over 76 million people in the first month of its release, which was the most watched season 1 of any show ever for Netflix. Of course, their definition of watched needs to be mentioned, since Netflix defines that as a viewer who has watched at least 2 minutes of a show. Unfortunately, it's somewhat impossible to compare Netflix viewership numbers to those of TV shows released on other platforms or other channels, because Netflix has chosen to use this somewhat ridiculous metric to inflate their numbers. However, even with that somewhat silly metric, The Witcher has obviously found success, and it has some parallels to The Wheel of Time. Both shows are based on popular existing IPs with big fan bases. Both shows are very distinctly fantasy, and both have a well-known lead actor, though Henry Cavill is definitely a bigger name than Rosamund Pike, and also a bigger name than Alvaro Morte. With Superman and Mission Impossible on his recent resume, Cavill is a major draw. Still, The Wheel of Time has star power too, and will be one of Amazon's leading shows. Stranger Things is a major sensation too, and is the talk of pop culture for the week or two of its release. Season 3 received over 26 million views on just its opening weekend. It has developed a cult following and fits into the category of fantasy, though it isn't really the same type of fantasy as The Witcher and Wheel of Time. Netflix has clearly had major success with its best dump release shows. The shows quickly become hot commodities as people want to binge them in order to be able to discuss them with friends and coworkers. The main benefit to dump style releases that people frequently point to is that you don't have to wait to see a show. Many people like to be able to watch the whole season all at once, in a few days or over a weekend. There's no waiting unless life prevents you from watching it all at once. Some people even say that they only want to watch shows all at once. If Amazon does release Wheel of Time all at once, I think it would be successful. The fan base would ravenously watch the show. I personally would definitely watch all 8 episodes, only stopping for food and bathroom breaks, and I guess come to think of it, I could probably watch it while I'm sitting in the bathroom, bring some food in there with me, and just kind of go through the whole thing all at once, no stopping. But how does that compare with a weekly release? Before I get into that, I've got to thank my supporters on Patreon. I needed to buy a new computer for video editing, and their support helped me greatly to be able to do that. If you'd also like to support my channel as I continue to grow and make more Wheel of Time content, check out the link in the video description below. If you can't support me on Patreon but are enjoying this video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel for more Wheel of Time content. I've recently made videos about a pretty controversial theory that I have, so check that out if you haven't watched it yet. And I've also made some about my thoughts for the upcoming show. With a weekly release, the main comparison shows are The Mandalorian, The Magicians, and Game of Thrones. As the most well-known and successful fantasy TV show, Game of Thrones is what Wheel of Time gets compared to most frequently, as do all other fantasy TV shows. HBO reported Game of Thrones Season 8 premiere to be at 17.4 million views. This shows a little bit why Netflix's numbers are a bit ludicrous, but it also shows why it's just harder to compare TV shows than it is movies. It's easy to track how much money movies made, and even relatively easy to compare how many tickets were sold, but it's not so easy with shows. Companies can report their numbers however they want to, which is why we have viewership over a month, over a weekend, and on opening night. Similarly, problems occur with the streaming services themselves. Netflix is a giant streaming service right now, and much bigger than HBO. Plus, there's no way of knowing how many illegal streams of the episodes there were, although it's estimated that there were 55 million pirated streams of that Game of Thrones Season 8 premiere episode. If you combine the legal and illegal Game of Thrones streams, the opening night is very similar to The Witcher's opening month, and crushes the Stranger Things opening weekend. But that is the finale season of Game of Thrones. The Game of Thrones Season 1, Episode 1 received 2.2 million views on opening night, which seems shockingly low now. However, you have to remember at the time, fantasy shows weren't popular. Game of Thrones really changed the market there. So now that I've talked a lot about viewership numbers without coming to much of a definitive conclusion, what's the takeaway? I think it's that either platform could be successful from a numbers format. If Amazon decided to go with a dump release or a weekly release, it would have success in terms of viewership. With that being the case, what other goals would Amazon Prime have? On the whole, Amazon Prime is obviously not a TV show making company. Buying Prime for the Wheel of Time gives you access to the full website benefits of an Amazon Prime membership, which I'm guessing is Amazon's primary interest in making TV shows on their own platform. This leads to the problem that HBO saw. Their subscription retention rate isn't great, likely because many people canceled their subscription when the show ended and renewed it the next season. I did that myself. This would be even more significant if the season lasted only one weekend. Instead, Amazon Prime could spread their 8 episodes out over 3 months, which is a quarter of the year that people would be keeping that subscription. Since I'm not an economic analyst though, I'll spend some more time on the other reason, fan engagement. If you run a vote of Wheel of Time fans on really any platform, of weekly versus dump release, you'll get the same results. Overwhelmingly, people want a weekly release. I've done 2 polls on Twitter, which received 202 and 746 votes. Weekly received 74% and 80% in the 2 polls, compared to just 26% and 20% for a dump style release. Weekly consistently outperforms dump as the desired release strategy with Wheel of Time fans. So why is that? It's because the Wheel of Time community is built on a sense of engagement, a sense of interaction, and a sense of shared experience. If you're a new reader, you've probably noticed how much veteran readers love hearing your reactions as you go along. If you've read the series before, you probably loved talking about it online as the books were coming out. Or like me, you found those online communities later on and are now thrilled. The community is so strong and so passionate right now, and has been for years. Game of Thrones experienced this trajectory, with its popularity soaring once word got out about its great storyline and its high production value. Once the general public got on board, as I believe they will with Amazon's Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones became a news phenomenon, dominating entertainment headlines for the weeks it was on air and a few weeks afterwards. The Mandalorian experienced a similar effect when Star Wars fans and new fans really got behind it and realized how entertaining it was. I don't think shows like The Witcher and Stranger Things really compare to this. Weekly shows do so much more for fan engagement and enjoyment. There are post-episode talk shows, breakdowns of each episode, nitpicking over details and changes, and of course constant speculation about the next week's episode. With the fan base that the Wheel of Time has already, this is a huge opportunity that they would be missing out on by not doing a weekly release. If Amazon hypothetically released the Wheel of Time in the middle of next June, they would dominate those headlines for June, July, and August. That's a quarter of the entire year that people are talking about the Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time community is so passionate and so ready to engage with this show. We want to give it the love that it deserves, and discuss it with family, friends, and each other. There are so many enthusiastic content creators on YouTube and in the podcast world, as well as other places, including myself, who are really looking forward to being able to obsess over each episode as a community. This really only happens to the fullest extent with a weekly release. While there are advantages of a dump release, and I think the show would still be successful in that format, I would miss out on so much of what I'm looking forward to with the Wheel of Time TV show, and I think Amazon would be missing out on a major way to draw in new fans. Fan engagement helped build the Wheel of Time book's popularity, and continues to be a huge part of the community, and I think it would be a huge benefit to the Wheel of Time show. I plan to continue promoting the desirability of a weekly release. If Rafe Judkins and the executives at Amazon hear it enough from the fans, I think they'll see the benefits of doing a weekly release, if they aren't planning that already. Amazon has experimented with different release types for its shows in the past. Wheel of Time, along with Lord of the Rings, are a new animal for Amazon, though, being majorly expensive and their first real foray into classic type of fantasy. They'll want to make sure that the Wheel of Time is given the best chance for success, and I believe a weekly release does that. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments if you're more in favor of a weekly release, or if you think that releasing the season all at once to binge would be the better option for Amazon. Please share this video with other people who might also be interested in the Wheel of Time TV show, and see what they think about it. Don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel before you go, especially if you're enjoying my videos. Thanks so much for watching and sharing. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Game of Thrones experienced this Game of Thrones experienced this trajectory with its Game of Thrones experienced this trajectory